Welcome everyone to the Oslo Freedom Forum panel on doing business in China. This panel is going to focus on corporate responsibility in the landscape of China's rise in the global market. The allure for companies everywhere, U.S. companies worldwide, and investors to doing business in China is obvious. According to the World Bank, the Chinese consumer market right now is the third largest, behind the U.S. and EU, and it's poised to actually overtake it in a few years. It's also the largest global manufacturer and heavily invests in sort of frontier research on, say, things like quantum computing and AI. So given this economic reality, global companies will continue to look for opportunities to do business in China. So we're here to talk about the pitfalls, what challenges they face, how it buttresses up to human rights issues, and what potential solutions are. It's always been kind of sporadic when you find companies sort of kowtowing to China, but this year in particular, since 2019, more and more cases have kind of been talked about and dominated on news cycles here. So let me introduce my illustrious panel. You'll probably recognize Kyle Bass from the last COVID con that we did, that Oslo Freedom Forum did. I think it was a few months ago. He is the founder and chief investment officer of Heyman Capital Management. Also, he's the founding member of the Committee on the Present Danger, China, and sits on the Council on Foreign Relations. Professor Christopher Balding, he is a professor at Fulbright University, Vietnam, and he actually taught in China for about 9 years before he got. What happened, Christopher? I'm not sure, but you got booted. I think you did something or you said something wrong. I'm not sure. But he left China. He's an expert on the Chinese economy and technology. And he also has a great Twitter account. Jenny Wang, she is HRF's strategic advisor. She's worked primarily on Hong Kong and China issues, and is the co-author of this report, which I really recommend everyone read at some point. It's Corporate Intimidation and Censorship, recommendations for foreign companies that are doing business in China. So let's start. I'm going to give everyone 5 minutes sort of opening remarks, and then we'll get into a conversation. And, it's not going to be an interview. I hope each panelist, if they so choose, would respond to others when there's a relevant point. So you want to take it away? Let's start with Kyle.
Oh, great. I get to go first. Well,
you do.
Melissa, it's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to be talking about, I think, what may be all of our favorite subjects here. So I'll start by saying, what I think is frequently lost on a lot of participants' views on China is the fact that we give them a lot of credit for the narrative they put around the world. And it's important to note that I believe that the nexus or the center of their ability to project themselves militarily or to project themselves with propaganda or to act in the ways they act around the world with, as Jenny's showing, intimidating and let's say running their businesses the way they run them, is rooted in the fact that they need to constantly source U.S. dollars. Well, any currency that they can spend, dollars, euros, yen, pounds, but needless to say, most of it's dollars. And 15% of the world GDP is supposedly Chinese, and yet less than 1.5% of the world transactions settle in Chinese currency. So they have to get dollars. And, I think it's important to note that they spend a lot of their time trying to put themselves into indices, maybe too soon. Maybe they coerce MSCI. They are now trying to raise as much money as they can through the Hong Kong IPOs. We're facing one of the largest we've ever seen with Ant Financial, with being a $225 billion plus company, and they're going to raise $30+ billion. And I'm going to get into that. But I believe that what we have to do to level the playing field to get China to act as a better global actor, not only financially, but especially in the human rights realm. I mean, you asked as part of this panel, what are some of the solutions? Well, one of them is for China to stop putting people in concentration camps. That's probably the first solution. Unfortunately, as we even see reporting today, it's going the other way. They're building hundreds and hundreds of these facilities. I actually don't know why we even do business with China, truthfully, Melissa, until they stop this crazy ethnic genocide, whether it's in Tibet or Xinjiang or Mongolia or wherever else they're committing this kind of atrocity. I don't know why we do invest in China. However, when we look at companies, I'd like to just talk about Ant Financial because it's top of mind for a lot of people. Ant Financial and Alibaba are both investors in Megvii, and Megvii is a Chinese AI company. It's a startup. However, the U.S. Commerce Department put Megvii on the restricted entities list because of they've been implicated in human rights violations and abuses in the implementation of China's corruption campaign and mass arbitrary detention. So even though it's on owned companies within Ant Financial and Alibaba, they're going to raise $30 billion, mostly from US and European investors. There'll be some investors in Hong Kong and China. But it's actually insane what they're doing because as you know, Alibaba and Ant Financial own a lot of AI companies, and a lot of those AI companies are used for this military civil fusion. You never know whether it's Chinese military or the government or both using it. And one of Ant's financial subsidiaries is, I don't know how to say it properly, Shima Credit Management, is among the 8 companies that are putting together Chinese personal credit scores. I mean, when you look through all of Ant's businesses, they are all basically Chinese government businesses masked as commercial enterprises. And yet here we are again, rushing to give them money to invest dollars that help China Inc. continue to propagate the nefarious activities that they engage in. So I'm going to stop there. I know you gave me 5 minutes, but I just think the entire basis for their existence should be questioned. And for some reason, we all shake our heads and say, yeah, that's a big deal, but I'd like to order some more shares of that IPO because I think it make money. I mean, until we can separate financial gain from morality, I don't think it's going to stop.
Well, that's very powerful. So Jenny, would you like to go next? 5 minutes.
Hi, everyone. Hope you guys are doing well and staying healthy during these difficult times. My name is Jenny Wang, and I'm with the Human Rights Foundation, HRF. As some of you may know already, HRF is an organization dedicated to promoting and protecting human rights in countries with authoritarian regimes. According to HRF's political regime analysis, China is a fully authoritarian regime in which there is no separation of powers and no judicial independence. There is a severe lack of respect for the fundamental rights of citizens. The one-party state is ruled by the Chinese Communist Party, CCP. Although civil liberties and freedoms are enshrined in Chapter 2 of the Constitution of the People's Republic of China, in practice, the Chinese government maintains a strong grip on all aspects of its citizens' lives in order to heavily suppress any criticism about and any rhetoric against its rules and ideologies. Ever since China's rise as a global trade giant, the CCP has leveraged its position in the global economy to intimidate foreign companies, ranging from various industries, into becoming messengers of its political ideology and apologists for the regime. Essentially, if foreign companies wish to profit in China, they must be willing to carry out pro-CCP ideology and narratives across their brands. We saw this very clearly last year during the Hong Kong protests, when the Chinese government, whether directly through its state-controlled media or indirectly through steering public opinion, chastised countless foreign companies like the NBA for siding with Hong Kong's pro-democracy movement.
Okay, come in fast.
The Chinese government was very successful at doing this, and in turn influencing public opinion not just inside China, but overseas as well. The CCP weaponizes its market power to hold it over anyone who does business in China. As you mentioned earlier, Melissa, my colleagues at HRF and I co-published this report titled Corporate Intimidation and Censorship in China. And it details a lot of specific examples of how the CCP has intimidated and coerced foreign companies operating in China to align with the CCP's agenda or face expulsion from the Chinese market. So whenever a company decides to abide by the Chinese government's requests, we need to remember that they are being complicit in the countless egregious human rights abuses committed by the CCP. And we must remember that when these companies are complicit, they are actively violating fundamental human rights, namely freedom of expression, which encompasses the freedom to receive and impart information without interference. I look forward to further discussing this topic with all of you and exploring some solutions for corporations and private citizens on how we can all uphold human rights when it relates to doing business in China. Thank you.
Wow, I can't believe everyone's on time. Amazing. Christopher, you're up next. Your opening remarks.
Yes, so I think I share sympathies with Kyle because I entered into my interest in China and human rights from a very similar angle. As a business school professor, I never set out to be a human rights focused individual. I never said, I come from a background where, business is good and capital flows and labor and international trade are positive things that should be encouraged. And that is how a lot of positive changes come about in the world. After 9 years in China, it became stunningly obvious the problems that existed in China and how they were actively seeking to export a lot of what they were doing. And acceptance of their business practices. And now living outside of China and being focused on these problems, I think what we need to focus on is, as Kyle has raised, is not just in the financial markets and how are we funding companies that are actively seeking to engage in human rights violations, military companies, things of that nature. But really how we are the companies that a lot of Americans take for granted. One example that has been in the news is Disney and its remake of Mulan. Disney likes to portray itself as a defender and campaigner of human rights outside of China. But when it comes to China, they actively participate and engage in ethnic suppression and filming in in the shadow of concentration camps. That is profoundly problematic. If we look at a company like Apple, Apple is a good example of a company that you could say, they protect user privacy. They have sued the U.S. government. They engage in activities that they think are ethically defensible outside of China. Inside of China, they are the complete opposite. And we're not looking for companies to violate we're not looking for radically different stances on these issues. We're looking for consistency. If they believe user privacy is important in the United States, then why isn't user privacy important in China? If Disney believes that concentration camps are bad and ethnic minorities should be defended outside of China, why are they so willing to do the complete opposite inside of China? And I think when we're looking at doing business in China and the responsibilities of corporations, we need to ask them, what is the standard that they are trying to uphold globally, and how does that apply to their behavior inside of China and with the CCP?
So maybe I'd like to, get into something a little bit more concrete for some of our listeners. If you guys have like a pet example of a company or an instance in which, this behavior by the Chinese Communist Party of corporate intimidation has been so egregious, what would it be? What is your sort of like that one case that would immediately grab people's attention, and for those that are not paying attention, make them wake up?
Sure. I would like to just piggyback what Christopher mentioned earlier about Mulan. And I think this is a kind of a fun activity for everyone in the audience. Try to think of one Hollywood movie or one Disney film that shows, the CCP or China in a bad light, or that is critical about China, or has a villain that is of Chinese descent. Can you think of anything? Right? It's hard because the answer is you probably can't think of anything, right? Disney and Hollywood are so intimidated, they want that access to the Chinese market, that they are willing to silence themselves and to make sure their scripts align with CCP propaganda and narratives, right? And I think Disney is my example that I would like to share. So in 1996, there was actually a film called Kundan, and it was a film about Tibet and His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And Disney obviously responded quite harshly because Tibet is a sensitive topic for the CCP, right? And then so there was actually a Disney ban in China until 1999. And then the live animated film, the cartoon film of Mulan, came out to kind of hopefully get back on the good side of China, right? And then this year in 2020, the live action film, it was obviously another way that Disney was really trying to stay on the good side of China and really eager to continue reaping the benefits of the Chinese market. So that's my example.
And I think one of the things is I'm actually in Los Angeles, and I have friends in the business, as they say here. And what was surprising to me is when they informed me, because in Hollywood there's basically two types of movies, and the one that concerns China are what they call the tent poles, the Star Wars, the Marvel comics, the big budget action movies. And one of the things they said is before a movie is even greenlit, meaning before they even go into production, start filming them, what they will actually do is they will send the script to the CCP censors and say, is there anything problematic that you think is in there that needs to be changed? Okay, think about that. Before they're even filming a movie, they're giving the script to the CCP to say, we want your approval, and then we're going to go ahead and film the movie. That's how deeply embedded these types of principles are, and how deep the CCP is into even something as free speech oriented as Hollywood.
And I think the show that really hit the nail on depicting this was actually, ironically, and maybe not ironically, it's South Park. If you remember the episode where Mickey Mouse was, a jerk, and they had to run everything by the Chinese censors, I think that was very accurate.
Yeah. So I'll add one thing to Jenny's comment. One thing that just incensed many of the people in the U.S. population was in the second filming of Top Gun. You're going to have Maverick's bomber jacket, but you know what flags won't be on there? The Taiwanese flag and the Japanese flag were forcibly taken off by the Chinese censors as that got filmed. Anyway, that's just an anecdote. From my perspective, I put together a team to look into ZTE. The report hasn't been made public. It's at the U.S. government at the moment. But we went around to 20 countries around the world and pulled local court cases of extensive bribery that have actually been taken to court. And you can pull all these local documents, and you can see that the ZTE became so brazen in their bribery that in one case they actually referred to the chief bribery officer of Shenzhen. So I think ZTE has a CBO, which is a first for me to hear. And the bribes don't even go through Cayman Island subs or other places around the world. Many of the bribes were sent directly from ZTE Shenzhen Inc. straight to the bribing party. And in many of these instances, ZTE paid the bail of their employee that was arrested, and paid their airfare to spirit them out, and many of them were fugitives from justice. This is 20 countries around the world. The same story everywhere you go. They bribe local officials, they bribe the government, they push other law-abiding companies out of contracts, and they get caught and they run their people back. It's unbelievable to me that the United States allows ZTE to operate within our borders, knowing that they run a company literally based on bribery and theft. And if you read this report, you'd be so mad by the time you finished it. I don't know. I mean, literally, it gets me so upset just talking about it. It's unbelievable. But maybe the U.S. government's going to do something about it.
So it seems that, because the company Jenny brought up, it's entertainment, and then Christopher focuses on tech, and Kyle, you're focusing on basically all businesses in general, and especially the finance companies. It seems like this infiltration has kind of happened in many different verticals. So in terms of tech, shall we go back to that? What do you think, the latest data leak, for example, I think it was Zhenhua was caught with this big, data leak. Do you guys want to comment on, specifically for tech companies, maybe they have more unique challenges, especially as they consider doing business in China? What are some things that are a bit more specific to the tech side?
So I think one of the things that and we're going to have additional stories on this in the months ahead. But I think one of the things that I think just Americans don't understand, and I'll be honest, until I started getting into this, I didn't really get the scale of it. But the scale of the data that China is monitoring and is just hacking and spiriting out of countries all over the world is truly staggering. I mean, words don't do it justice, the amount of data that they are taking. They basically, and I think one of the things is a lot of times when we think of decoupling, we think of TikTok. TikTok is an example that's in the news, and people say, oh, well, they're watching our little cute videos on TikTok. Let me just give you an example. There are products that we know of, electronic components, that China is basically embedding with code that transmits back to China what is going on with that specific component. And I've personally seen databases covering all kinds of things, from car parts to phone batteries to all kinds of other things that allows them to reap data, harvest data from around the world on, things that people are doing, that allows them, depending on the device and things like that allows them to hack into these things. And they keep these databases on these devices globally. That should be very problematic. One of the things that Secretary Pompeo talked about was the clean network that they're introducing, and I think a lot of people took that to mean, well, the U.S. is introducing a great firewall, and that's not accurate. What it's really doing is saying, what are the standards for things like network components, devices, IoT. IoT, for instance, has awful security, generally speaking, and it's basically mostly made in China. So if we're going to have IoT devices in our homes, connected washing machines, connected entertainment systems in cars, how do we ensure the security of those devices so that governments globally, but specifically China, aren't using all of that data?
Yeah, you're going to see here in the next 30, 45 days a report come from a very reputable press outlet that's going to be titled "The Largest National Security Breach in U.S. History." And this is more of what Christopher's saying with IoT. They're also embedding things and software updates and hardware in much larger platforms that have been found out. And it's just pervasive. As Christopher said, I didn't start out from the financial side looking to expose IP theft or human rights abuses. But what you see when you study the CCP for a number of years is you can throw a dartboard at anything and you're going to hit some of their fraud one way or the other, or some of their nefarious or malign intent. And so from this perspective, I think that the clean network and things that it's almost like we need a Manhattan Project, because we run a democracy and we run private enterprise mostly, but we need to do something as a country and as a developed West and for democracy to shield ourselves from the manner in which they operate. It's a fundamental conflict of two different ideologies. They believe that theft and bribery and coercion are all fair game, and clearly that's not the way responsible global actors work. And so I think that's the biggest issue here. And we all need to figure out how to come up with a solution that might work.
And their actions will end up compromising our values as well globally, which is what we started to see so obviously in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jenny, go ahead.
No problem. Absolutely. I just wanted to agree with everything that Kyle and Christopher mentioned earlier. And I think maybe one good step is, going back to the issue of foreign companies doing business in China. They can play a really big role in stepping up and realizing that they're being inconsistent in their messaging, realizing that they're being incredibly hypocritical, right? I think so. I want to just bring it back here. So in the US, right, in the recent events here in the US with the killing of George Floyd, we saw an awakened civil society that was really eager to speak up against injustice, against inequality, against police brutality. And there's so many brands out there, Nike, Vans, even Activision Blizzard, that were really excited to step up and say, you know what, we're not going to sit back and we're not going to be silent. But these same brands are being silent when it comes to doing business in China. So I think that's one angle that we could look at this together.
I do want to, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think one of the things that is to make it just very understandable for people is that we talk about this as the CCP and this very systemic issue, which it is. But I think a lot of times, I have a friend who does completely non-political business in China, but he says the problem with China is you tell people the stories, like on the ground stories of what takes place in China, and they're so absurd, they're so crazy, nobody believes you. And one of the ones that actually made the news, so I can repeat it, is there was GSK almost 8 years ago now. So this wasn't even more recent when Western business was under. But basically, the Chinese security service implanted a video camera in the China CEO's bedroom to make a sex tape of him and his girlfriend, and then sent it to the board of directors of GSK. Saying remove this gentleman as CEO of GSK China or there will be problems. This is what passes for normal practice. I can tell you I've had friends in China that were in senior mid-level positions that would go out with Chinese clients and they would parade 5 Chinese women in front of them and they would say, pick one. She's yours for the night. That was considered standard operating practice with Chinese business. And the stories are just so absurd, and how they're compromised, and how the individuals and businesses are compromised, that it's not something that I think any business culture, any economic system, it would be considered acceptable practice.
But in the beginning, when China first opened up its markets, it used a lot of forced tech transfer to invite foreign investment. So I'm just wondering what changed along the way. Has it always been like that and we're only uncovering it now? Or did China kind of change structurally or philosophically somehow over the years and there was more of a pivot in terms of strategy?
I can go back on that history, right? So in 1978, Deng Xiaoping had his open door policy, and it's to welcome more foreign investments to the Chinese market, and we saw a huge economic growth, right? But then even as China grew economically stronger, they became more eager to increase its global influence politically, right? So, but I think there was a real shift in 2018 when Xi Jinping consolidated his power to abolish term limits. So ever since Xi Jinping came into power in China, he's been tightening his grip both domestically and internationally. And I think we can see that a lot more prevalent these days.
Okay, I want to go back to something that Kyle actually said, because in your opening you said, why are we even doing business in China? So I want to go something. There was a story I read maybe a few days ago. It was an interview with Adam Silver, the commissioner of the National Basketball League, and the NBA actually, he said that he was trying to defend their business relationship with China. And he said, at the end of the day, I'm going to quote him. He said, somebody could say, given the system of government in China, that the NBA should not operate there. I would only say that at the end of the day, I think these decisions for our government in terms of where Americans' business should operate, i.e. what he's saying is that it's better for people to, it's still better for the NBA to be there, for people-to-people exchanges by playing in China. It's a positive, it's a net positive. I've seen many business leaders make the same kind of argument. Kyle, what do you think about this?
I mean, it's so easy to see through. Adam Silver is so transparent. All right, his motivation is money. It's his paycheck. And it's LeBron James's paycheck. It's everyone in the NBA's paycheck. There is no fundamental rational answer. If you know what's going on, if you've seen Sir Jeffrey Nice's China Tribunal, and you've read anything about the forced labor camps in Xinjiang and Tibet and Mongolia, there is no fundamental reason to engage with that kind of regime. And the only reason you could possibly justify it is, well, maybe I'll make a few dollars. Maybe I can make more than anyone else. Maybe I can just turn a blind eye and I can be woke when I'm back in the United States, but I don't need to be woke when I'm in China because I don't really live there and I'm just taking their money. I know a couple of NBA owners. I've sat across the table from them having this conversation with them. And in the end, they said, yeah, well, I mean, we really need the revenue from China. They all agree that it's about money privately. So it's like, we don't care. Like, we don't see it. And the Chinese are brilliant. They don't let cameras in Xinjiang. You guys have seen when reporters go there what happens to those reporters, and we're all relying everything you see, we're relying on satellite images. And I was actually at a human rights event in the US Senate when a senior Senate intelligence staffer came up to me and he said, you're right about Xinjiang. He says, we in the Senate Intelligence Committee knew there was going to be a real problem when we saw them building crematoriums in each of these forced labor camps and concentration camps. He said, they don't choose a new pope when white smoke comes out of the crematorium, smokestacks. And I know it's kind of a joke, but it's not a joke. It's like, we as a country, we know it. Our intelligence agencies know exactly what they're building. We know exactly where they are. And we have to rely on satellite imagery and not pictures. Imagine if we got cameras in and the world could see what they're actually doing. If you read ChinaTribunal.com, Sir Jeffrey Nice oversaw Slobodan Milosevic's war crimes tribunal in The Hague. Read the final report. They rip organs out of people while they're still alive. It's just an organ buffet. You can't imagine like the ferocity of your emotions when you're reading through this. It's actually hard to read. And yet the NBA loves putting up a practice facility in Xinjiang. Like when you talk about hypocrisy, Jenny, it's the NBA is probably the largest hypocrite of them all. It's insane.
So, what can be done about that? I think a lot of people who either have done business or still are doing business in China, it's difficult to disentangle. Our economies are so hyperlinked. I think COVID has really exposed just how dependent we are on supply chains that are there, that some of which are very critical, like for medicines. So people are really waking up to this. Also, since President Trump started the trade war, a lot of people have started to become more and more aware of how linked our economies are. So what do you guys recommend in terms of solutions? I mean, I think one of the concerns has always been what happens if we compromise in our values dealing with the China threat. I'd like to focus on the next section of the panel on solutions, and then we'll move into Q&A later. So let's talk solutions. What do you guys think about this?
I think maybe one example we can touch about is Apple. I think the whole NBA story reminded me of Apple and how just a few weeks ago, Apple announced a new human rights policy, right? So as you may know, Apple was under a lot of fire for removing apps in China and Hong Kong and a lot of other labor issues and abuses in the workplace. And they received a lot of pressure from their stakeholders, from activists, from private citizens, and from human rights groups, right? So I think more pressure needs to be done from the civil society level to push these corporations to, maybe enact a human rights policy, right? And it's great that Apple has this new human rights policy, but I think we all need to continue pushing them because right now this policy actually lacks an implementation mechanism. So for example, the policy says that they will comply with higher standards of international human rights, but actually it also says, quote, we respect national law while seeking to respect the principles of internationally recognized human rights. So they're still kind of kowtowing to China, but I think just having a human rights policy in general is a really good step, and that's something to build upon.
Okay.
I think building upon something Kyle said earlier, which is absolutely true, and that is the absolute weak point for China is hard currency at the end of the day. We can talk about, ethics and morals and human rights and all of that kind of good stuff. But at the end of the day, if you want to push change in China, you hit them in hard currency. And one of the things is we talk about decoupling, and it's amazing to me that there's kind of like among a lot of people, there's this defeatist attitude that, before you even bring it up, it's like, well, it can never happen. It's not going to happen. So let's just accept it and move on. And in reality, you've seen numerous companies actually set up additional let's say redundant manufacturing operations to basically replace their existing operations in China. Samsung for many years has had massive manufacturing operations in Vietnam. You've seen Foxconn, which makes iPhones for Apple in India. where they basically have the ability, if needed to, where their Chinese operations will be solely for the Chinese market, and their outside operations will be for the rest of the world. And I think when we think about this, we need to say, first of all, yes, this absolutely can happen. That doesn't mean it's going to be frictionless or zero cost, but absolutely it can and does happen. From a policy stage, one of the things I would say, if I was to criticize the Trump administration and definitely companies in the European Union on this, is what can government do to facilitate that shift away from China? For instance, we've seen Japan actually offer subsidies for companies that are going to either delink their manufacturing operations or separate China manufacturing for the Chinese market and non-Chinese manufacturing for the non-Chinese market. So what are the methods that need to happen to really push to continue pushing that change?
How about tech solutions? You talked about the clean network, decoupling our internet. What do you think tech solutions might be?
So I think one of the very interesting aspects there is in a way, I think there is really sparked a conversation in a lot of ways. And one of the things that I've become a strong believer in is the importance for data privacy and data protection, not just with regards to China, but in general. Once you get into the data world, I think it's absolutely stunning how unsecure and how unprivate a lot of data is. And this applies not just to my views with regards to China, but with regards to the United States, Europe. I used to think that those Europeans were rather squishy, and GDPR, data protection, was just squishy European socialism. I've probably swung a little bit further now, where I say GDPR should probably go further in protecting user privacy and user data. I think another issue that's probably being realized is what are the legal mechanisms? You're not going to stop tech from collecting data. I think what needs to be happen, for instance, requirements on governments to access that data. How can we strengthen, government mandates so that when they, the documentation, the legal requirements for them to access the data, and the same thing for companies. For instance, if Facebook is going to sell your data, can it be anonymized so that nobody can really know whose data that they're actually looking? Even if they want to sell you a pot, a pan, an Amazon Prime account, they don't really know who they're selling that to. They just see it as essentially a stream of data. There's different things there, but I do think it is very important that we in democracy say how can we strengthen private secure networks, clean networks for component manufacturers, and the requirements that we put on everything from social media to manufacturers.
So Melissa, I'll answer a couple of your questions. Number one, something that Jenny said about Apple being a bit of a hypocrisy. Have any of you been to Foxconn's facilities in China? They have 3 stories of suicide nets on their building. They run hot bunks. They run 12-hour shifts. So someone is working a 12-hour shift while someone's in the bed, and then someone else works out the 12-hour shift, and they do it constantly for 2-3 weeks in a row. So people jump off the buildings and kill themselves all the time. But Apple's fine with that because these people earn $1 an hour, and they can put out dual and competing privacy or morality statements like Jenny just announced. You say what can be done. I believe to use kind of a Sun Tzu tactic. We need to cut the blood flow off from the tumor. Back to what Christopher agreed with. We've got to start, and this merges into something you said, Melissa. How do we not compromise our own values in this fight? All we have to do is use our rule of law to enforce our laws on bad banks. If all we do is enforce U.S. law on Chinese financial institutions, on European financial institutions, and even U.S. financial institutions in Asia, if we stop their bad behavior by sanctioning them, all of a sudden everyone will get their act together very quickly. And if we sanction the right banks, dollar liquidity dries up for the Chinese Communist Party. and you say, well, this can't happen. We're too interlinked. I mean, I'm sure you've read a lot of history books about World War I and what was being said right before we entered World War I. Can't possibly have a world war where our economies are too interlinked. We have too much reliance on different areas of Europe. We can't possibly be into a war. And before World War II, the exact same thing was said. So I hear what you're saying, but I don't really hear what you're saying. All I see is history potentially repeating itself. So I'll stop there, and actually I'll go one more, because Christopher talked about data, and you say, what about data? For a U.S. company, for instance, as Beijing's bankers in the U.S., as Goldman Sachs and Citigroup and Morgan Stanley decide to wholly own their operations in China, one of the prerequisites for that ownership is you may not take the data out of China. The data has to reside on servers in China. Well, why don't we enter into this thing called reciprocity? Why don't we say, anything you're going to do over here, we keep the data? Because that's what we're saying in TikTok, and they're saying, oh no, we can't possibly do that. So I think this concept of reciprocity and a level playing field works, and it can't be seen as being xenophobic or racist or whatever you want to call it. Just say, well, if we all play by the same rules, the U.S. can compete with anybody, right? If we can't play by the same rules, we're going to get run over. And so I believe we just enforce our own rule of law, and we can fix these things.
What do you guys think is the role of global partners, or maybe even regions, that might be able to help companies decide if they want to decouple from China? Who are likely partners you foresee kind of stepping up, or potentially us forming alliances with?
I think it's very key to understand, what we mean by specific, alliances or partners. In Asia, where I've spent a lot of time, one of the things that's so interesting is there's really no country there where the China is really loved, even in its supposed partners like Cambodia or Laos. Nobody is like, yay China. With that said, you also have, even among countries that view China as a real threat, a real concern, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to jump on, let's say, the U.S. bandwagon, for lack of a better term. I think a better way to approach it is, let's look for countries where there's ways to cooperate and ways to move forward. And Vietnam would be a good example. Vietnam's experience in the trade war was very interesting. They were getting enormous outflows of companies that were leaving China and coming to Vietnam. So how could the U.S., for instance, work with Vietnam on naval issues in the South China Sea? How could we work with them to say, if you set these types of standards for your companies that are going to be exporting, this is how we can offer you preferential access to the U.S. market, different things like that, while at the same time, understanding to be significant differences going forward. And you have a similar issue in Europe. There's a lot of countries, I think, where the opinion is really changing with regards to China. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to enter into, some type of formal "go get China" alliance, for lack of a better term. So how do you find those avenues for cooperation, recognizing that we could at least offer them cover, for lack of a better term, in how they're doing that? If you look at Huawei as a good example, you see a lot of countries creating telecom regulations that effectively block Huawei but don't name Huawei. And so I think that's probably the type of operation that you can see as to how the U.S. can help countries work through some of these thorny issues.
How about India? Does anyone want to take India or Taiwan as potential?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think we can approach this multilaterally and bilaterally, right? So multilaterally, there's like the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. There's the Clean 5G network that Secretary Pompeo mentioned a few months earlier. And now we can also look at the bilateral relations, right? So for example, recently there's been a series of high-level visits to Taiwan, right? So there's Secretary Azar, there's Secretary Keith Crash. There's also a delegation from the Czech Republic that went to go visit. And China, the CCP obviously made a big fuss about all these visits, but it was really inspiring and encouraging to see a lot of countries in the EU step up and condemn CCP's bullying. And I think this is a really good trajectory. So there's two approaches, multilateral and bilateral.
Kyle, so are you hearing anything about people in finance or manufacturing even starting to pivot elsewhere?
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of Fortune 500 companies that kind of got the message. I think Chris alluded to this earlier. A lot of these companies are moving their supply chains out of China. You can't do that overnight. It takes enormous amounts of CapEx. And you also have to do it not really under the cover of darkness, but you can't do it overtly. That's why you're not reading about it. Many of these companies are moving out of China and moving elsewhere, places like Vietnam, places like Cambodia, places like, basically anywhere else in Southeast Asia that isn't China. People are moving, and even Mexico, moving their supply chains there. That is happening. And, and Jenny's right, with, you see more and more visits to Taiwan from people like Keith Crack. And, these are large statements by the United States. And then China immediately responds with erasing the line in the Taiwan Strait, flying fighters and bombers, over Taiwan. I don't know how China just doesn't go after Taiwan at some point in time in the near term. So I don't know how much longer a bilateral relationship with Taiwan is going to be great. But I think it's important to note that global corporations are definitely moving their supply chains out of China where they can.
So it sounds like business is aware. Sorry, go on.
Oh, I was just going to piggyback on something that Kyle said. One of the things is, as he said, moving out under the cover of darkness. One of the things that you've heard is, especially if you're a company, for instance, and I've heard more than a few of these stories, where if you have a forced JV partner and you want to move your operations out of, if it's been in, let's say you have a plant that's been there 10 years and you want to move it to Cambodia, the JV partner will say, well, this plant has been here 10 years, so we'll only give you $1 for it. That's all it's worth. Okay. And maybe you invested $100 million and even now it's a $50 million revenue business or something like that. They'll just say, we're going to offer you $1. Well, that's all there is, take it or leave it. Otherwise we're with the CCP and we'll just seize it, or, we won't let you take the money out of China. That's another very common story. You actually sell your business, you're going to move it somewhere, but the money can't leave China. There's all kinds of stories like that. So when you talk about this cover of darkness concept, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, and businesses have gotten a little bit smarter. What businesses do now is, even if they have a Chinese manufacturing operation, they only wire in enough dollars to change into RMB to pay labor, but they never let any of the actual gross proceeds of the sale of their equipment internationally get into China. It gets wired to bank accounts in Sydney or Singapore or even used to be Hong Kong. Now they're going to wire them somewhere else. Those kinds of operations are, Christopher, if you have to close them down, you close them down. If you own the factory, you lose the money, but all of your assets aren't there. And I think people have gotten wise to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, my feed just cut off. You probably can't see me, but can you hear me?
Yes. Yes. We can.
Okay. I'm going to load the camera back, but just one question so you can debate while I fix that issue. So, that is on the business side of things. What are the solutions when it comes to, because the allure of the Chinese consumer market is still going to be there. So what are the solutions in terms of how we should deal with the companies that we all talked about earlier that do kowtow to the CCP's ideology or political messaging? When they use their economic leverage to do so, to force them to buy into their narrative and promote that. What are the solutions there? Is it just shame? Is it the law? How do we deal with this?
So I'll start off by just giving one example. I think one of the things that stunned me once you started looking at a lot of what was happening with China was just how often a lot of law entirely ignored, not followed at all. And I'll just give you one simple example. Foreign donations to universities above, I think, 250,000 are all supposed to be recorded. And universities were sending in these forms that listed everything as basically blank. Okay, I mean, it's an absolute black and white violation of U.S. law. And you had universities saying, well, hey, we just don't want to do it. It's a partisan effort. No, it's black and white U.S. law. You have to list, who are foreigners donating above $250,000 a year to your university. And there's this kind of ongoing fight with universities now over this issue. If you just follow a lot of the laws, we talk about laws that need to be created or something like that. A lot of this is covered by existing legislation, as Kyle alluded to, whether it's the banking laws and things like that. A lot of these, if the laws are just executed right now, rather than being ignored, I think right there, that would be a major step forward.
I want to go back to your question about how do we push brands to not get swayed by the Chinese market's allure. I think there's a really kind of local grassroots person-by-person effort. I think if we look, for example, Kaepernick, he was an NFL player, and then they had a Nike's Dream Crazy campaign, right? And then after that campaign, sales boosted because everyone was so happy to see, a brand speaking up for social justice, for racial equality, right? And then, for example, there was also a Gap campaign, which advocated and supported the LGBTQ community, right? And in that example too, sales boosted. I think what brands need to recognize is that when they stand on the right side of history, it's a good thing. And then their market here in the U.S. will appreciate that.
I'll enforce something that Chris just said. About enforcing laws. I'll make an interesting statement. The U.S. has a law on its books called the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. We in the United States have never brought a Foreign Corrupt Practices Act case against a Chinese company. We've brought a couple against Chinese individuals. We've brought FCPA cases against every single ally we have, hundreds of times. But China has been off limits in the Obama administration, particularly in the Bush administration before that. Again, not being partisan. President Bush 43, President Obama, China was off limits. And I'll correct one thing you said, Melissa, and I'm not defending Trump whatsoever. I'm not a Trump voter. I didn't vote for him, just to be clear. I appreciate his policies, but Trump didn't start the trade war. The Chinese started it long ago, and Trump just started fighting it. So everyone calls it Trump's trade war because China wants you to call it Trump's trade war. That basically they got caught with their hand in the cookie jar, and Trump started leveling the playing field, and all of a sudden he got branded with it. I kind of take offense to those kind of CCP narratives that aren't true.
No, I've written about that. That's been a bit of my beat, and I agree with you. It's just a shortcut. So should we? We have about half an hour left on the session, and I think we might as well head into Q&A, unless there are other things that people, that any of you on the panel want to address, talk about. But if not, let's head into the Q&A. So if you're right here in the room on the chat session, please feel free to ask any questions. I see some already. Joy of HRF, I think she's supposed to feed me some good questions. Joy, are you here?
Chris, it looks like you're up first there from Hongjiang.
Okay, so let me see. Hongjiang.
Let's see.
Hey Melissa, if you go to our chat window in the vision page,
chat window?
I sent you a couple questions there.
Oh, got it. Got it. Okay.
That is quite the question from Hongjiang. How much more power does Xi need to grab before HRF can designate China as a totalitarian regime instead of an authoritarian regime? I will leave the designation between authoritarian and totalitarian scientists, but I will say it is absolutely stunning. I kind of jokingly say that the only difference these days between North Korea and China is a better paycheck, and it's amazingly true how truer and truer that is every day. And I think one of the things that I would emphasize is I really knew, I'll be honest in saying I was kind of late to understanding, living in China, I was kind of late to understanding how big and how deep the shift that was taking place was. And I remember very specifically in let's say the 2018, spring of 2018, I was talking with colleagues, I was still going to conferences, and even people that I would classify as pro-party, party members. And they were looking at me with fear in their eyes. Okay. These were not democracy campaigners. These were not human rights campaigners. These were people that I would consider pro-party, pro-Beijing, believe that she could do good things. And they were talking to me with fear in their eyes. And I think you're seeing that, with Ren getting sentenced to 18 years the other day. This was a gentleman that came directly out of the system. I mean, I think you're probably very close to that point, if you're not there already. But I think it just speaks to, first of all, the fragility and the fear that is deeply pervasive in Beijing and in China right now.
So I have another question, and this is from Zelda Liang. It's about economic sanctions. I think the question here is, how can we ensure it would be effective given the track record of non-targeted economic sanctions?
Well, look, I'm an advocate of, again, sanctioning the banks that are enabling and breaking law, enabling CCP, breaking global laws and U.S. laws. Again, the United States actually holds all the cards to dollar liquidity. And if we start sanctioning specific financial institutions, it will have a chilling effect on their activity, on how they operate, and how they think about operating in the future. If we take them off the SWIFT system, their ability to move dollars around stops. And so you can have pinpoint laser guided accuracy by sanctioning the bad actors. And by the way, all of the big SOE banks, all of the policy banks, all the joint stock banks in China, they are all under consent decrees for money laundering or have bad acts. We all know you don't become a billionaire in China because you're a simple entrepreneur, right? You have deep party ties and you've been allowed to become a billionaire, and they can take it away from you at any time. I mean, it is easy to see where the corruption is, and all we have to do is start sanctioning those financial institutions. And there are a few of them. If we were to sanction even the British bank, HSBC, in Hong Kong, it would severely inhibit the CCP's access to dollars overnight.
I guess
so. If I can,
go on.
Oh,
sorry.
Just to kind of build upon something Kyle was saying, how do you target them? We need to be careful that we're not just, targeting all of China. At the same time, as Kyle has basically said, we can, especially with dollar liquidity, which is absolutely the weak link in everything. It's very easy to do. And just to, and again, it gets back to just enforcing the laws that we have on the books in the United States. And to take a simple example, Chinese companies, when they list in the United States, the agreement with China and the United States is that basically China does not recognize Security and Exchange Commission jurisdiction over Chinese companies. Okay, so when people say, well, why are you saying this about Chinese companies? The only thing we're asking for is that a Chinese company listing in the United States be treated the exact same way as an American company, a European company that lists in the United States. We're not asking for extra requirements. We're not asking for special Chinese requirements. We're just asking that they be treated the exact same way. And if they're not treated the exact same way, I mean, nobody would make the argument that Google shouldn't have to file an audited financial statement. Nobody would argue that. But we argue that for Chinese companies. And so if you say we're going to block US dollar flows to these companies that don't abide by US law when they're listing on US markets, that would have an enormous and very targeted impact.
What do you guys think are the ramifications then for what's happened with Hong Kong recently and the financial markets there? Because there are a lot of one of the appeals of Hong Kong was that was the business base, that was the Asian headquarters, the site of Asian headquarters. I think that's going to evolve.
I mean, my own view is they're also going to move out. I think Western businesses that have a lot of assets in Hong Kong are going to, again, not under the cover of darkness, but they're not going to also put a press release out saying we're moving, but they are going to move, and they're going to move everything they can. And what you've seen the CCP do basically as a result of what Chris was talking about. Chris and I are advocates of leveling the playing field, enforcing covered audits. Imagine how much fraud exists in unaudited companies. God knows, we know how much fraud exists in audited companies. Imagine how much is in there in unaudited companies. So I think that as a result of the US starting to talk about forcing compliance with PCAOB covered audits by all companies, including Chinese companies in the US, you saw Jack Ma make a statement. And he made a statement that says all Chinese entrepreneurs should go public in Hong Kong right now, i.e. before the window closes. And think about Ant Financial. Ant Financial was supposed to come public mid-2021. Now they want to get it done before the election, because after the election, all bets are off. Even if Biden comes in, I think all bets are off. So you're seeing a huge number of IPOs move to Hong Kong. Now remember, there are only 5 entities that control the Hong Kong exchange. When you think about Hong Kong Shanghai Stock Connect, you should think about Hong Kong Shanghai Bond Connect. There are literally 5 entities. And if those entities get sanctioned, again, the dollar liquidity to China, the blood to the tumor of the CCP stops. And I can tell you that's in the playbook of the United States government. The question is the president ready to let's say, play that card? And you know what? Businesses in Hong Kong have been given ample notice. Businesses, US businesses in China, understand the geopolitics here. This is not going to be a surprise to anyone if and when it happens.
I believe there are about 150 China-based companies that have almost a combined market value of 1.2 trillion listed on U.S. stock exchanges. So that's at the end since the end of 2019. So that's a lot of money. That's
yeah. But Melissa, don't confuse and conflate how much money U.S. investors have there. If something lists in the U.S. and it's a VIE structure in the Cayman Islands where you actually don't own anything, right? You just own it's a fantasy football bet on the Chinese company, just in case things go wrong. By the way, you own nothing. When they list and they have a market cap, that doesn't mean U.S. investors invested that much money in them. That's a misnomer, and that's part of the CCP narrative. Oh, you can't do that because you're going to lose $1.2 trillion. We would lose a fraction of that money, and it would be better for our country in the long run.
Okay, this is good.
So I think, oh, sorry, go, Jenny, you want to jump in? So what I was going to say was, is building upon what Kyle said about Hong Kong. If you actually look at a lot of contracts between companies, even ones that operate in China, what they actually did is they actually designated Hong Kong typically as the jurisdiction of dispute resolution. And so now that Hong Kong as we know it is effectively dead. What that means is those companies are looking for jurisdictions that have reliable rule of law systems. Now, Singapore has a lot of its own issues. Let's not go down that road now, but they do have, I think, what is generally considered a pretty reliable contract dispute resolution for companies, and they will recognize a contract as it is written. And so absolutely, you're going to see a lot of companies be leaving that. And I think the other thing is that the reason Hong Kong mattered is that's where not only contracts were enforced, but that is where a lot of the fundraising was done. That was the entry into China. And so if dollar flows get restricted to Hong Kong, if companies start moving their bases to Singapore or Tokyo, Seoul, etc., that is going to have a major effect. And he's right in saying they're not going to be issuing press releases this is happening. They're just going to quietly be moving staff.
Okay, moving on to Jason Taylor's question. Hi, Jason is a longtime supporter of HRF. His question is, the GOP senators recently sent a letter to Netflix inquiring about their partnership with Liu Cixin, who wrote The Three-Body Problem, which is actually a pretty good book, to adapt the book into a series. Is this an effective method to prevent China's influence from reaching U.S., or is this unnecessary censorship?
I can take this. I haven't read that letter, but I do know that several congressional members recently wrote a letter about the Mulan film, right? And I think these are good efforts and these are needed efforts. It's important that we do not stay silent about, egregious human rights violations, and that we do not stay silent about the CCP's violations of human rights. And is this unnecessary censorship? I do not think it is unnecessary censorship. And this goes back to what Kyle was saying in his opening remarks. We need to level the playing field. So we need to be speaking up about these things.
I think what makes that and I'll be honest in saying I've not read the book, but everything I hear about it is it's a wonderful book. But I think what is so notable about this case is that the author is a very notable supporter of what is happening in Xinjiang, and that makes it deeply problematic. I mean, imagine if we had a German author in 1942. Supporting what was happening, and we were going to remake a book of his into a movie. I mean, there would understandably be very significant problems with that. So I think it is at best a major problem to say we're going to remake this and not expect any problems, that we're just going to ignore the positions of this author.
Right. Yeah, I think we've seen Netflix kind of kowtow before when they pulled, I think Hassan Minaj had an episode in his Netflix show, that was very critical of Saudi Arabia, and Netflix actually pulled his show when they entered the Saudi market. So we see. I think these are very legitimate questions to ask a company like Netflix, who have shown a history of doing this kind of thing. Okay, so I have one last question here. So should there be, in a way it's kind of repetitive, but should there be more oversight on how American businesses conduct themselves in China? Does this panel believe that this will encourage more ethical investing?
I mean, I think that I go back to, why would an American business invest in China, given the enormity of the human rights atrocities going on in these various regions in China? I think, again, the only way you make that investment is if you're willing to just turn a blind eye to your morality, and many people have. As far as U.S. oversight, clearly we should protect ourselves and try to protect our companies. But I think when companies get over there and actually move PP&E over there, that I think that's at their own risk.
I mean, I would say, very similar, but slightly different to Kyle. If I should say I come from a free market type of background. Okay, so I don't think companies are necessarily motivated, on the basis of human rights. Almost no company looks at, hey, is this a human rights issue? This is how I'm going to plan my business. If we look at one example. We have to make it costly for them on a human rights basis to get them to change their practices. Whether that is shaming, one example that has taken place recently is raising the cost of legal liability. And this was most recently done with the exportation of Xinjiang cotton and then textile production. And look, I'm a free market type of guy. I don't like imposing laws and regulations on business. Okay, so this is not my knee-jerk reaction, but there has to be, in this case, legal liability attached to if cotton is found to be coming from plants that you're buying T-shirts from to sell at the Gap, at H&M, whatever, at Macy's. There needs to be legal liability attached, that you absolutely are guaranteeing that cotton, that T-shirt is not made with concentration camp labor, with forced labor elsewhere. And I think raising the costs to push compliance with human rights interests is a valid use of state authority.
Analogous to blood diamonds. I mean, it did wonders for the diamond business. It can do wonders for human rights violations in China.
Yeah.
I want to make a note that private citizens and consumers and everyone listening in on this panel right now can help make a difference too, right? I think, we can wear your values. Ask your favorite brands to be transparent about where/how their items, their apparel are being made. And I think all of us need to really stand firm to our values. Let's not be hypocritical here, right? Let's demand brands to uphold human rights for everyone, regardless of religion, regardless of nationality, regardless of ethnicity. So there's something we can all do here.
I think it's pretty amazing that when you go order something on Amazon, there's not a country of origin for what you're purchasing. I think Amazon should be forced to label, and if it's some percentage of labor, Apple have can give you a matrix as to how much of it was made in China or made somewhere where there's totalitarian governments or oppressive regimes in place, and then consumers can actually make their own decision whether they want to pay a little bit more for something that might not be from somewhere that they don't approve of the government.
Well, Amazon has also made it really easy for Chinese companies to kind of, sort of pay to play
Yes.
and get on that platform. And I think there was a case, remember there was a company, called the guy who produced this As Seen on TV products, who got, because a Chinese company had, blueprints for his products and started manufacturing and selling them to third-party sellers on Amazon. I think somebody else, maybe one last question or two, depending on how long we take. Jeff, Radio Free Asia has a question. People are talking about product shifting out of China. Do you guys have any solid data describing this trend and where are they going?
So I'll partially answer this, and Kyle might have some other examples. I think one of the things that is so interesting about this trade war, issues that are being faced, especially with regards to supply chains, were not things that people kept data on, to be quite frank. And so at the beginning of this, there were a lot of people that were actually scrambling to put together detailed data on supply chains, even sometimes just for their own company. That I talked to and not just, well, I buy it from this guy, and then they were like, but then he has inputs that come from these guys. And so they did not have, a lot of people did not have good understandings of their supply chains. And even if you look at, for instance, like a macro type of level, a lot of what we're looking at, if you look at like PP&E as an example, I think a lot of countries did not realize how dependent they were on China for this. And so I think you're looking at a lot of rethinking of what does risk mean at a country level, at a firm level, for all of this stuff. And to be honest, there's not a lot of good data on that, to be honest. And so we look at, a lot of that, let's say, shadow stuff where if electronics exports from China are declining by this much, and they're going up by a corresponding amount in another country, what does that say about where production might have shifted? But to be honest, at the supply chain level of what you're referring to, there's not a lot of good data. Kyle?
I mean, look, I advise a number of these companies, and I'm not going to out them, but publicly, you see Apple moving they're actually moving a large part of their supply chain out of China, and that's well known in public. But you'll see more over time.
Jim Warnock, who works with HRF as well, he has mentioned in the comments section here that there's a tech called Source Map that can help consumers and business create transparent supply chains. I mean, at the end of the day, I think transparency is really the number one thing, so that consumers can act on that information. So Hoi Trin, who I think is Vietnamese, has a question. He says, well, Vietnam is just as oppressive, just not as well known. If companies are moving to Vietnam, how can ethical or moral questions be ignored? This is more of a moral or philosophical questions. Other countries have issues too. How do we deal with that?
So, having just left Vietnam, let's not make any bones about it. It is a communist authoritarian state. I would say I would disagree with the assessment that it is just as oppressive and authoritarian as China. I do think that is. I do think, and again, we're talking shades of something here, but I would say it's distinctly less than China. that still doesn't mean it's a great democracy by any stretch of the imagination. So don't mistake that. But I think one of the things is that that needs to be considered is, and this is something both at a firm level and a country level, who do you partner with? Because, even if you just look at Southeast Asia, a lot of countries there have issues, shall we say. So how do you incentivize that? If you're the US government, how can you work with countries to maybe say, hey, we will give you preferred market access for, changing things in certain ways, or at least moving towards different practices. So I think that's definitely a very important issue.
Yeah, well, Jenny from HRF, I'm sure you have some insight, because, there are, when it comes to human rights violations and ranking countries on that, there are degrees of freedom, right? Proportionality matters. We should be able to talk about more oppressive or less oppressive countries and make these decisions.
Definitely. And I saw my colleague answered this question in the chat, so I just want to piggyback what she said, that he's right. We need to have more awareness about this. And maybe right now there's just not enough awareness now.
Do we have any last question? We have maybe space for one. Prachi. Hi, Prachi. She's with HRF as well. She says, there have been a number of companies coming under fire for being complicit in China's human rights violations, but the CCP doesn't seem to be backing down. There was an APSI today showing that China has opened more, that Kyle referenced that, more detention centers in the last few months, for example. So if the goal is to improve human rights in China, is boycotting companies or focusing on corporate ethics going to be an effective strategy in the long run?
So, look, I believe that what the U.S. has done, what Secretary Pompeo has done with going after Huawei and CTE and TikTok and WeChat and everything that they're doing, they're fighting valiant battles there, and they're winning individual battles. If the U.S. wants to level the playing field and really force China to the stage and become a call it respectable global actor, then the only way to do it is go after their Achilles heel and start restricting dollar liquidity. And once we do that, China doesn't have a plan B. There isn't a plan B. And so I think it's necessary.
And the other example, and this is you have this argument with a lot of people who says, well, we need engagement now more than ever to make change and things like that. And part of me is like, if we have any more engagement based upon the engagement over the past 20 years, what is China going to do with more engagement?
Right.
I mean, this is the perfect example of just beating a failed strategy into the ground.
Yeah,
doubling down.
I agree.
Yeah. Jenny?
No, I definitely agree. And I think what we see with China is pulling in an international relations theory here. It's realism, right? They have so much power, and they're just going to use that power to continue growing their power. So we really do need to level the playing field and, hit it where it hurts.
Starting to see, we're also starting to see a lot more aggressive soft power plays.
Yes.
Maybe they're making up for something else, but especially with climate change announcement, the climate pledge 2060 to be carbon neutral, and all sorts of other, international plays that they're making as well.
Melissa, by 2060, I promise to give everyone I know $1 billion.
Well, we're not just an autocratic techno surveillance state. We're carbon neutral autocratic techno surveillance state, which matters.
Yeah.
Okay.
I 8 by 10 of that happening.
I want to thank everybody for being on this panel, for taking the time out for this really important discussion, and also. I followed a few of you on Twitter, so it's always nice to see you face to face and actually have a conversation. And also to all the people who are watching, this will actually also be up on YouTube. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for HRF and all the organizers at the Oslo Freedom Forum for making this happen.
It's a pleasure to be with you all.
Thank you, guys.
Good to see you all again.
Good to see you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.